Take my hand.
Julie exploded in laughter, grinning widely as she slammed her foot down, sending a shockwave of distortions in all directions. Callie darted in front of me and I felt a hard crack as the air was diffused around her.
Julie,
She hissed, stepping away from me.
what do you think you're doing?
They shot at me first.
Julie giggled, the tendrils further extending, sharpened bones working their way to the tips.
But now that you've shown up,
She continued, her teeth sharpening in a wild smile.
I guess I can finish that goal instead. You don't deserve to be like me.
Her form blurred in my vision as she scrambled forwards with blinding speed.
Stop.
Callie hissed, sidestepping and bringing up her chains in defense, flinching as Julie's tendrils impacted the metal.
You can't win this. No matter how much flesh you repurpose, you're defenseless against me.
Is that right?
Julie grinned widely, her eyes widening in delight as she heaved Callie's chains upwards with distortions and slashed her tendrils forwards, parrying Callie's rebuttal and landing a strike straight into her chest. Callie's eyes twitched with pain before Julie slashed to the left, throwing her against the wall, causing blood to erupt from her mouth. Callie frantically dodged another wave of strikes and her eyes went dark as her bloody teeth gnashed. After scrambling to her feet, she arced back a chain before pivoting on her heels and thrashing it downwards with such force that it instantly glowed red hot. Julie's eyes splintered wide in panic and she jumped back, whipping her tendrils in front of her. The boiling metal cleaved straight through the ropey flesh, and although it was deflected slightly by Julie's panicked distortions, it hacked across her torso, cleaving diagonally across her chest. More ropey tendrils instantly squirmed in panic to hold the slashed body together as the creature staggered violently. Pieces of Julie's body fell limply to the ground all around her before her ghastly face suddenly cocked upwards, her mouth spewing bloody saliva as she shrieked with laughter and she gnashed her teeth downwards, cleaving off her own tongue and suddenly exploding her body in every direction. Flesh wound together like spikes as countless fleshy spears erupted forwards. Callie flinched backwards in panic and staggered in pain as several tendrils threaded through her body, one bony scythe nearly slashing her left leg clean off. Callie's chains fell to the ground to hold herself up, and by the time her leg had healed enough for her to stand properly again, the creature had pinned Julie's mangled body to the ceiling with tendrils, yanking the spears from Callie before slashing away the panels and scrambling up into the venting. The entire scene dripped with her hot blood as her maniacal laughter disappeared into the blackness. Everything was dead quiet as Callie turned to me, her eyes crested with worry.
Something is very wrong.
She stammered, walking over to me slowly.
She could influence my chains with distortions, and yet I couldn't influence her flesh tendrils at all.
I coughed, staggering to my feet, meaning to speak before something caught my eye. A nurse had appeared down the hall, walking forward slowly and watching on with a sort of confidence that unnerved me. At my reaction, Callie's eyes turned to the figure and went wide.
That's who followed me here.
She spoke, her eyes narrowing as her chain slashed into the air. I looked closer to see that it wasn't a nurse at all. She wore a long white lab coat, her heels clicking against the tile as she strode forwards, a crimson, scantily clad red dress visible underneath the coat. A smile split across her face as she neared, and my memory finally recalled her form. She was the strange scientist who had interviewed me about the massacre all those years ago. My fist balled and I took a step back. "She's with the facility," I cried to Callie. "We have to go."
Maybe.
The figure spoke, putting up her hands, framing her ghastly smile and hideously blue eyes.
But it's just me for now.
She stopped, just out of range of Callie's chains, running her hand through her wavy hair with delight, looking all around the gruesome scene. Flesh and bone were scattered in heaps, and her heels lightly kicked a piece of vertebra against a wall.
My.
Her hands landed on her hips as she continued.
I'm only here to warn you, John. I don't think the caravan will take long to reach this place, and you won't stand a chance against 104. It's a miracle she let you live last time.
Last time? I stammered in sheer confusion. What do you mean? Who the hell are you?
The memory usually takes a few days to return.
The woman grinned.
I'm sure you were quite confused when you came to, with all those corpses around you in your house. 104 didn't listen all that well. That damn thing even took down one of our helicopters.
What are you talking about? I cried, glancing at Callie to see her shake her head and slowly raise a metal tendril.
I can explain all this later. However, it is highly urgent that you come with me right now, before they awaken.
The woman spoke, turning to walk towards Callie, causing Callie's eyes to widen slightly and her chain to halt in confusion.
And Subject 12!
Her smile widened further as she grinned out.
You were unable to influence that left hand's tendril because they were part of the host's body. And as you know, left hands cannot directly influence each other due to the empathetic feedback response.
Callie's face grew irritated as she hissed out.
That doesn't make sense. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been able to directly tear apart left hands before. You're lying.
Oh, really?
The woman grinned.
That was when your failsafe was still intact, wasn't it?
Callie's eyes narrowed in confusion.
My failsafe.
Oh, sure.
She smiled, holding out her hand.
Didn't you ever wonder who stopped your failsafe from receiving the kill signal the night that you so miraculously escaped? Didn't you ever wonder who dialed down the dosage of poison?
You're the one who allowed the host to reawaken, I cried. How could you have known that would happen if you weakened the parasite? The woman's face grew perplexed as she turned to me.
The host?
She echoed, confused.
Reawaken? What are you talking about?
The director told me everything, I stammered to her before turning to Callie and continuing. Callie, there's something evil inside you. It's not the drugs that gave you telekinetic abilities. It's not the chains that make you a monster. A parasite has been controlling you ever since 8th grade and maybe even long before. Her face grew dark, her posture dissolving. Aside from turning you into a sort of weapon to aid humanity's cause, I continued, the main goal of the facility was to repress the parasite in the hopes of reawakening the host.
The host?
She echoed, her green eyes looking at me with concern. That's you, I stammered. Callie, by some miracle, you're awake in a codependent relationship alongside something with the exclusive goal of killing humans. You can talk because the real you, the human you, is in control. The hospital crawled with wind as her sickened black hair began to obscure her face. She took a step towards me on spindly limbs, and her eyes seemed to glow a hideous emerald. She looked to be working through things in her head, her confusion turning to pity as her cold lips parted.
That's not my sole goal.
She stammered slowly, taking another several seconds before more words sloshed forth like a thick sludge, asking a question that made my heart stop.
Just what do you think I am, John? Who says we can't talk?
Words failed me. The night you escaped, I stammered. The injection of poison from your failsafe wounded the parasite inside of you, forcing it to reactivate your brain, Callie's brain. Don't you remember that?
It didn't inject me then.
Callie stammered, her eyes wandering as she recalled that night.
I thought it might have fired, simply because I felt different from before. I felt so strange.
Exactly, I cried, becoming further panicked as I began to question my own words. You said you felt different. That's because the parasite had been weakened and your human brain was filling in the gaps.
No,
She said slowly.
I felt alive. For the first time.
I went to speak, but Callie's next words stopped the sentence in my throat.
The poison was injected when I was hacked apart.
She said confidently.
The pin mechanism had activated a few hours prior, but I was healed enough by that point to stop it from firing. When I was forced to reconstruct my body, however, I was unable to keep it stagnant. I don't remember much after that, just horrible blurs.
My heart had begun to decay, my world being turned upside down. After you were slashed apart, I stammered. Callie, you could no longer talk. You could only hiss. I think you tried to kill me. Callie's eyes went wide, horror splashing across her face.
You know, I would never do that.
She spoke softly. That's not the problem here, I cried, tearing at my scalp. During that time, it should have been the only time Callie was awake, when the parasite wasn't in full control. But what you're saying means that...
John,
The woman spoke.
the thing you've been speaking with.
You're... not Callie. I stammered through numb lips, backing away from the creature with chains erupting from its back. You've never been Callie. No, you're not! I screamed, unable to keep my hands from clawing down my face in horror. Stop saying that! You're not Callie!
John,
She stammered, her face alight with despair.
what does it matter? We're one and the same.
Shut up! I cried, taking a step back. You killed Callie! To think I was talking to nothing but a fucking worm!
I don't know what you
Callie
mean.
cried.
John, please stop this. I am Callie. Everything you know is me.
I don't know you at all then! I screamed, my words dying out in anguish before I could say anything else. Tears streamed down my face, my hands numb and shaking despite my attempts to clench them tight. When you said the massacre didn't feel like your memories, when you swore that wasn't you, you were flat out lying to me.
I wasn't lying. I changed. That isn't me anymore. Those memories aren't the ones I wanted to remember. John, you have to understand.
There's no time for this!
The woman called.
John, get over it. We need to go.
Her form encroached on mine, her hand moving forwards to grab my shoulder. She went to speak again, but her form suddenly staggered back in horror as a streak of red slashed across her face. She screamed in agony and clutched at her gushing skin, flowing with red, as her left eye fell to the ground alongside several chunks of flesh.
Don't touch him, you dumb bitch.
Julie's hideous form cackled from the ceiling, slashing several more tendrils forwards before the woman rolled to the wall and scrambled for her life, barely escaping the onslaught. The creature smiled, scrambling from the ceiling and onto all fours, spitting blood from her deranged face as she rushed towards the woman's fleeing form. A tendril flashed forwards and pierced through her ankle, slamming her to the ground before dragging her backwards. The woman's eyes widened in pure terror as she clawed at the ground. Just as Julie slashed another tendril forwards, however, the air suddenly shrieked and a black streak hacked the tendril in half. I turned to see that Callie was still beside me, and my gaze flashed back to the scene to see that the black streak was nothing but a horrifically long coil of razor wire, coming from something all the way around the corner of the hospital. Another parasite? I didn't wait to find out. My hand closed around Callie's wrist, causing her eyes to go wide as I lunged into a sprint in the opposite direction, dragging her along with me, not even bothering to look back. The cold air stung at my lungs as I jumped down from the window, rolling on the ground several times and scrambling for the gun I had snatched. I watched Callie land gracefully beside me seconds later. She went to speak, but I wouldn't let her, instead just grabbing her wrist again and taking off towards the highway in the distance, watching the lights on the other side of the hospital flash red and blue as awfully familiar helicopters droned overhead.
John, are you?
Callie stammered as we ran. Why? I spoke, cutting her off and not slowing my pace. I just want to know why.
She
spoke softly.
Not like you, John. I can't expect you to
Why
understand.
did you let Julie live? Callie's eyes went wide, her green eyes flashing to me. I'm not asking about the rest of the class, I continued softly, my eyes drifting away. I just want to know why you spared her. Did you know back then that she was a left hand?
She wasn't.
Callie stammered.
She was human then.
My eyes flicked to her, confusion arcing through my face.
And I thought I had something worse than death for her.
Callie continued softly.
I let her live so that she can know the pain I felt.
Her eyes glanced away from me, her face reddening.
I knew what I was for a long time. Knew I was different from everyone else. I heard things without meaning to. Did things that scared people and made them fear me. I lived in isolation for all those years. Began to lash out at those trying to pretend to be friendly. I resented them all. Humanity was my enemy. If they were going to treat me like something to be feared, I would give them something to fear.
Her eyes went dark, a light smile twitching at the corners of her mouth.
Julie was the nicest of them all. So unnaturally naive, foolish, and happy all the time. She always fit in, had friends, and played nice. I would kill them all, then make her like me. She would know what it was like to be despised, just because you're different.
My mind churned heavily, gears slipping and grinding as my eyes abruptly splintered wide. The day of the massacre, I stammered, my tone panicked. You infected Julie. Is that even how it works? Before she could respond, I cried out in horror. If what you're saying is true, Julie was completely deranged and sociopathic far before she became a left hand. If the parasite has nothing to do with her insanity, you gave a psychopath the power to destroy the world.
What?
Callie stammered.
Julie isn't...
It was all an act, I cried. She seemed unnaturally happy because she was playing us for fools. You have no idea how deranged she is. That naive girl was nothing but a serial killer in the making. What you did is nothing compared to what she has in store. My fears only intensified as I judged the distance between us, the highway, and the approaching car. At this rate, by the time we reached the road, the car would be so close and going so fast that walking out in front of it meant any driver would hit us before they could react. A distant voice suddenly rang out behind us, one I immediately recognized as Julie's. My muscles tensed, but as Callie went to turn around in panic, I just slid my grip from her wrist to her hand, gripping it tightly and urging her forwards. There's no time, I spoke. Those helicopters likely mean that whatever force the facility dispatched has arrived. They'll deal with her. I used to think the facility could help us, but if they're not repressing the parasites, what the hell are they doing? Surely it's nothing good. We have to leave now. Callie's eyes went wide, and her face flushed as her murky black hair trailed behind her. Her emerald eyes glanced at her hands.
I don't understand.
She stammered softly.
Why are you still...
I don't know, I gnashed, stealing a glance behind me to see Julie's spider-like silhouette scrambling forwards, followed by countless flashlight beams and shouting voices.
You shouldn't be so quick to humanize me.
Callie whispered, glancing back as well. Her eyes dropped to the ground, her grip loosening in mine.
I know what you're thinking. What you have been thinking. I don't deserve that after what I did to you. You're wrong.
I glanced ahead to see that the approaching headlights had been joined by countless more from both directions. The bodies of the vehicles were black and reflective. I don't care, I hissed slowly, feeling the heavy metal of the gun in my hand. Even if I am, it doesn't matter. Her widening eyes flashed in the approaching lights. I thought this would mean something, I spoke, my voice nearly being drowned out by an approaching chopper. This should mean something! Why doesn't this change anything for me? My eyes stung as light tears blurred my vision and my hand tightened. The world suddenly erupted in blinding light, the air crawling in a fury as a black silhouette hovered above us like a massive shark. Despite everything you've revealed, I continued, the true monster you let yourself become so long ago, I still firmly believe I know you today better than you've ever known yourself. Someone just told me they changed, that their memories of the past are no longer ones they identify with. You spoke those words, but I can see you don't trust yourself with them. If you still see yourself as nothing but an agent of fear, my goal stands just as it always has. If this destiny is something you wish to free yourself from, it's not a matter of what you deserve. I will do whatever it takes to prove to you that you're not controlled by what you are, that you're not a slave to this My vision blurred with pain as red hacked into view and blood splattered my face like acid. I watched my fingertips fall to my feet in a horrid shower of blood. No sooner were Callie and my hands hacked apart than a spear erupted into view from within my shoulder, and Julie's voice slashed into the air.
What are you doing?
She hissed as her tendril yanked backwards, wrenching me towards her. My hands fumbled in panicked agony for the spine as it threatened to puncture through my lung. As my eyes flashed to Julie's horrid form, it was clear that something was seriously wrong with her, even more than before. Her skin was barely covering large portions of her muscles bloody and torn away. Whatever had hacked off her tendril with that razor wire had taken quite a chunk out of her before she could escape. Although she looked mostly pieced together, her hoodie was in shambles, her black skirt dripping with crimson as her pale legs bent in unnatural angles to hold her up. Her flesh, although repurposed, was highly limited, as if she had lost quite a bit. Her soiled golden hair whipped around in an unnatural fury as the helicopter droned overhead. Her yellow eyes constricted into pinpricks as she clenched her teeth together and slashed backwards again, wrenching the tendril from my shoulder in a shower of dark blood before instantly slashing another whip forwards. My heart squirmed into my throat as a bony scythe hacked across my windpipe as it lightly settled into place. The bloody bone marrow crawled with distortions as it pressed against my skin, and I felt the hot, wet tendrils squirm in a loop around my throat to close off any oxygen.
Being unfaithful, are we, John?
Her voice hissed, being drowned out by the sound of opening car doors and shouting men. Callie's eyes went wide, her stance cringing in rage as metal rattled on the ground. Now is hardly the time, I gasped, my hands uselessly clawing at the slippery tentacle.
I'm not mad.
Her voice hissed out, the tendril tightening the more I tried to peel it away.
You would never sink that low. I'm mad about whatever the fuck girl tried to make me explode in every goddamn direction.
Julie's form staggered to stand beside me, her teeth flashing in the blinding light as she glared at Callie and hissed out.
Just who the fuck do you make friends with, eh?
Julie,
Callie spoke, glancing at the approaching flashlights and vehicles.
I don't know what you're talking about. You have to let us
Bullshit!
Julie shrieked, a smile alighting across her face as her flesh crawled around her disjointed form.
That scientist lady called you Subject 12, and then she affectionately referred to that fucking thing as Subject 104. I don't know what the fuck that means, but it means something. You two are together.
Julie,
Callie seethed, suddenly growing angry as silhouettes began to surround us and I watched our forms become painted with laser sights.
I won't hesitate to kill you.
I coughed, straining for a breath.
104 isn't with us. If you hold us here, we're all going to die.
Shut it!
Julie gnashed before her eyes softened and she glanced at me.
I know you don't have anything to do with this, John.
Her form squirmed against mine, her lips brushing my ear.
Once we're done with Callie, I'm going to...
Her eyes went wide, her form splashing with crimson as blackness hacked across her spine. Tendrils ineffectively scrambled to sew the corpse together as another strike cleaved her legs in half, splintering the bones like wood shavings. Spider-like legs of flesh instantly wrapped around the chain to hold it in place as Julie staggered away from me and opened her mouth in horror to speak. Callie's teeth gnashed, cutting Julie off, her eyes narrowing as she pivoted and slashed another spear forwards. The metal blurred and nearly shattered as Julie cringed away in horror. Her form heaved in defensive distortions, deflecting the spear but a few inches away from her own face. Her flesh tendril dropped limply from my neck as she threw her hands up and her mouth split open in horrified agony as she tried to take a step back in surrender. Callie just hissed venomously, throwing another chain forwards, her face becoming obscured by blood as she smashed the device straight through Julie's skull. The metal erupted out the back of her head, and her vile, yellow eyes instantly fell to a dull gray. Dark crimson bubbled from her lips as her lids twitched slightly, and the air around her fell into stagnation. Her body convulsed slightly as it slowly sunk to the ground. Callie, I stammered, catching my breath and staggering away as the air blistered with heat. I'm not sure if you need to. Callie's eyes remained dark, her teeth showing as she hacked the chain upwards, instantly wrenching Julie's head from the fragmented form and arcing it to the ground, where she drove it into the asphalt so hard the pavement splintered in every direction. She lifted up what was left of the collapsed skull before hurling it into the rotor of the helicopter above us. A heavy crack left the chopper to quaver in its hover as the skull splintered apart and exploded against the metal body of the vehicle. Callie's dark, silhouetted face split in a smile. The high beam of the helicopter swept away from her form as it tried to retain its position in the sky. Hissing laughter bubbled up from Callie's lips as she stabbed at Julie's mangled corpse, puncturing huge gashes in her flesh with every violent rush of metal, before slashing a chain upwards along the base of her spine, leaving the already decapitated corpse to fall to the asphalt in two smoldering fragments. A booming voice suddenly counted down from 3 as the helicopter's light again landed on Callie, and the night abruptly erupted in violent gunfire, molten lead streaking like fireflies through my vision as Callie's eyes went wide and her form became all but invisible due to the intense distortions enveloping her form. Heavy impacts were heard as the bullets were redirected back into riot shields. Callie's crouched form barely had time to stagger to its feet again before orders suddenly rang out from some sort of megaphone.
Subject 12!
The voice called from a fair distance away.
We only wanted your attention. You are not in danger. Please stop. Our team will take care of your left-hand offspring from here on out. You are not to destroy it.
My eyes flashed in horror to the smoldering heap that was Julie's corpse, to see that it was still squirming with tendrils trying to piece itself together. Just how resilient were these fucking things? Callie clearly saw this as well, because her chains instantly slashed into the air again and she hissed violently before the voice again shouted.
I said stop!
A rapid countdown ensued, bullet fire screaming forwards before Callie could take a step. However, this time she seemed all too prepared, and from within the blinding sphere of deflected energy surrounding her quavering form, I watched a hideous smile burst across her face. Unrivaled glee spread through her twisted grin as her eyes splintered wide and her hands clawed in front of her. A massive cut of air burst forth from her form, screaming into the air and instantly carving into the chassis of the helicopter above her. The rotors splintered in every direction as the metal liquefied and panicked shouts were heard. All light instantly cut to black as the floodlight went dead and metal shrieked through my vision as blurred shrapnel. The voice went to shout something, but was cut off as Callie slashed out distortions and the raining shrapnel became redirected spears that splintered into the crowd. She grinned with delight and ignored the cries of terror as the helicopter impacted the ground beside her and erupted in flames. Callie braced to rush forwards, her chains arcing back towards Julie's body before the mess of flesh squirmed to the side like some horrid spider. It was then that the helicopter body exploded, the percussive shockwave enough to knock the air from my lungs as my skin instantly blistered from the intense heat. Mere inches from the blast, Callie's form staggered on its feet as flames wrapped around her form in a ball before diffusing against the ground with a shockwave of air. Her skin was blackened and torn away as she staggered on all fours and her chains squirmed around her like serpents. Her skin rapidly wound together, paler than ever as she tried to scramble back to her feet. A form finally stepped out behind her from within a line of cruisers, one hand firmly holding a megaphone. I turned towards the silhouette, knowing who it was even before I saw his face. His block-like glasses gleamed with the red and blue sirens, his grin genuine enough to make me sick. Two people walked beside him, one man in a military uniform, the other the same female scientist I had just seen in the hospital. A bandage was over her left eye as she staggered. The suited man in the center walked in gangly strides, his awkwardly tall body moving forwards with a purpose so solidified it bordered on madness, obsession. The director. My rage was near instantaneous, my fist clenching before his eyes even landed on me.
Time to change tactics, eh?
He smirked, his form silhouetted by the lights of several trucks behind him, having parked outside the ring of black cars.
They never listen.
Yet more armed men swarmed in a firing squad line. Many of them had what looked to be flamethrowers, pyrotechnic experts dragging lines of wire every which way as ATVs arrived at the location. Mounted machine guns glinted in the cool night air that now split apart with shouting voices and radio chatter. Several more helicopters joined the chaos overhead, the rhythmic chopping so loud it vibrated the bones in my chest. All of this, however, was the least of my concerns. "You fucking liar!" I screamed at the director. "The parasites can talk. They are nothing like what you described. What the hell are you doing to them? What the hell did you do to Callie?"
What are you on about, boy?
He snapped, his smirk disintegrating instantly.
We are winning a war here! There's no room for gray areas!
I watched his eyes rapidly flick between the woman and the military man beside him. My teeth clenched, white-hot rage flashing through me. Callie's form blurred as she cackled with glee and darted towards the director, her chains erupting forwards. "Why the fuck did you lie to me?" I again screamed, my footsteps heavy and rigid as I stormed towards him. "What gray areas? What the hell are you doing to them? Answer me, you piece of shit! Just what kind of bullshit have you been spreading?"
You watch your tongue, boy.
He gnashed.
Dare talk to me that way? I'm getting sick of your attitude.
He sighed heavily as Callie tore across the vaporizing concrete towards him, slashing a metal tendril at his skull.
And you too, Subject 12.
He sighed.
Stop that.
Callie's advance was cut short as her legs simply exploded. The pavement rushed to greet her body as her eyes went wide in horror and she rolled like a broken doll. My eyes narrowed and I brought up my gun without a second thought. With precision that scared even me, the sight lined up with the director's skull within a second and my fingers slammed back the trigger before his mouth could even open in horror. The round screamed forwards before suddenly erupting in a flash of light as it impacted right between his eyes. He flinched backwards as the vaporized metal clambered softly into the air and his brow furrowed. It was only at this point that I noticed that one of his arms was occupied, A tiny, pale hand was gripped around his left sleeve. It belonged to a girl of no more than 8. Baggy scrubs draped over her spindly form as her dead skin quavered with distortions. A faint 104 was painted across her chest, but it was largely covered by a seemingly endless length of razor wire coiled around her waist, strangling the life out of her tiny body. My eye twitched in rage and I pointed the gun at the director again, pulling the trigger again before training it on the girl and firing several more times. My hands balled in rage as the little girl slashed apart the bullets like they were flies.
Thank you, 104.
The director sighed, adjusting his glasses before his eyes landed on me.
Seems you've gotten a lot more unstable since the first time we met, eh, John? Shame.
I didn't even realize his hand had disappeared into his jacket until it resurfaced, the metal of a firearm splintering into my vision, pointed at my heart. His fingers smashed the trigger down before I could blink, and the bullet tore forwards with such speed that I felt the air around me shatter as it splintered into my chest. I staggered backwards, my eyes wide in shock as I glanced down at my wound with shaking irises. The director grunted in shock, his hand flying to his head in a subconscious reaction as the metal slug shattered inches from his left eye. He staggered back, his gritted teeth flashing in the dim light as the round was again vaporized by 104 and he remained unharmed.
You...
He seethed, slamming his gun to the ground. My shock at watching the air around me warp and slash the bullet back at his skull was instantly replaced by a huge grin as his rage yanked laughter from my throat.
The left-hand parasite is unable to target males.
The military personnel said, taking a step back.
What does this...
This is strange.
The female doctor cut him off.
Director, what are you...
Doesn't matter!
He screamed, rage attempting to mask his panic.
Why can it formulate speech?
The military personnel questioned, worry cresting over his dark eyes.
I said it doesn't matter!
The director shrieked, his narrowing eyes burning holes in me as he fished around in his pocket, quickly producing a radio-like transmitter.
Subject 104!
He screamed.
End this! Disengage bullet destruction and activate redirection!
His arm lurched forwards, throwing the girl into the open. Her tiny body staggered forwards, her baggy hospital scrub so overly large that the sleeves covered her tiny hands. As she casually lifted her ghastly pale face, her eyes slowly came into view. Hideously large red spheres encircled by a single black ring, as if her blood vessels had all but shattered. Her irises burned against her blank white skin as her small hands clawed together. The director fiddled with something on his device, causing her to stumble to the ground.
Destroy the parasites!
He shouted, taking a step back. The girl was on all fours, her skin shifting like churning waves. The coil around her body began to unravel with the vibrations of an angry rattlesnake as she stared at the ground, her fingernails digging into the liquefied asphalt. I just gritted my teeth, watching the razor wire unravel further and further. Her fluttering white hair revealed that she had no pigment anywhere at all. It was just solid white against those sickly red spheres. Why the hell was she so young? How did her parasite awaken so fast? Answer my question, director! I spoke, refusing to back up, watching Callie stagger to her newly formed feet. Without so much as a warning, 104's form suddenly exploded in a gory mess, splintering from existence, her flesh dissolving into stringy strands. Blood painted the ground as the imploding air cracked with thunder, and her body simultaneously reformed, standing upright, several feet to her left. A light trail of blood traveled the distance as it swirled into her disjointed form again. My limbs fell numb, my mouth falling open in horror as a hideous chorus of laughter came from the little girl who had seemingly just teleported. Her broken red eyes danced across our faces, her pale skin utterly see-through, sometimes flaying from her body in heavy distortions that moved her form around like it was nothing but a mess of sporadic cells. Her baggy scrubs fluttered violently as if in a hurricane, her bleached white hair slithering like countless serpents. Hissing laughter erupted from her throat.
Ready to part with my body.